Pues muchísimas gracias, Diego. Vamos a dar...
Whenever you're ready. Well, thank you very much then, Diego. So, good afternoon. We're resuming our sessions. I will take the liberty not to announce the panel members and the protocol greetings to see if we can save a couple of minutes from the delay we already have after the first two sessions, which were highly connected in terms of structures and regulations on how we could enhance our cooperation with Africa, and another one showing how language was a key and fundamental aspect. We now have a third round table, academic and scientific cooperation, in the understanding that the participants will share their thoughts about existing resources and deployment of Spanish universities and research centers, present status, and expectations of cooperation with Africa. Our participants come mostly from the CSIC, a key research institution for the creation of know-how with a broad internationalization strategy, as well as other representatives from CEPIE. Our panel members come from the Association of Spanish Scientists in South Africa, and therefore they have a perspective on the other geographic space covered here. We also have the director of the Navarra Center for International Development and the director of the Women for Africa Foundation. So, on the occasion of Africa's Day, as part of the conference of Spanish universities that I'm honored to preside, we put together a symposium with several participants, and we conducted some surveys to Spanish universities. And my colleague, Maria Garcia de la Torre, coordinator of the internationalization team, gave us the data coming from respondents, which I believe are a good supplement to the information provided here today, showing on one side that there is a clear interest. Just to give you some numbers from Pilar's results, 80% of respondents, universities, most of them, do have cooperation programs with Sub-Saharan Africa and conduct activities via cooperation programs with ISIT or in the different Spanish states and the programs they organize. And in terms of funding, well, most of their funding comes from their own funds, a portion of external funding, and Women for Africa, which is also an important institution according to the data from the survey. In terms of mobility, respondents claim that 95% of them have actual programs in place for mobility with southern African countries, and only 5% of them don't. So that's a very interesting thing to know in an area where resources are limited and where the actions we need to consider must be carefully thought out in symposia like this. So without further ado, I will leave the floor to our participants with a slight change that one of the panel members needs to leave early. So I will give the floor to Ángeles González Borrego, chair of CSIC. She has been institutional delegate in Asturias and a researcher in the Science and Technology Institute for Carbon. She has a degree on geology by the Complutense University of Madrid, and she also received a Marie Curie grant. So the floor is yours, but stick to the allocated time of 10 minutes, please. Okay. I guess you can hear me now. Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity to sit here and share our perspectives with all of you. I'm here to present the activities we have launched at CSIC in the field of internationalization, specifically with sub-Saharan countries. Actually, CSIC has a specific chapter called ALCO. It's a summons for cooperation, and all eligible countries for assistance to development can participate. This is enabled by the funds from the International Cooperation Agency, and a very special opportunity within CSIC, since we don't usually fund any calls for projects. We make science. We don't fund it. But in this case, we can open this tender to pick projects that can be are seen as scientifically relevant and also strategically or socially relevant. So I would like to go over the subjects or the fields in which CSIC is engaged in cooperation projects with Africa. Many or some of these projects are larger scale, involving not only CSIC departments, but also other research institutions and universities from other European countries, considering their nature. And these are projects where African countries work shoulder to shoulder with European institutions. All of these fields are focused on, for instance, ocean research. Ocean research is a priority field for all research centers thinking about the future, but projects also include sustainable ocean maintenance, coastline observations, carbon cycles in connection with the ocean. All of these fields have a priority and are likely to be developed in African countries, which can provide a supplementary vision to the knowledge we have already gathered. Obviously, fisheries, species monitoring, these are projects in which we participate. Another quite relevant aspect is sustainable agriculture. It might seem evident that there are plenty of areas where today's knowledge and technology will have to be adapted to specific African circumstances, like populations of germs that will allow us to struggle against pests or diseases, new plants or enhanced plants that can adapt to sustainable projects, human health research projects, like the research that connects the human microbiota and the diet in different countries and regions. We see more and more of these projects, and it has been proven that the microbiota is fundamental in people's health. So in places where this relationship varies, or in places where the diet is different, the biota is different, and then local species like avocado or mango have to be adapted to certain conditions. But it's not just about ocean or diet projects, which might seem more linked to Africa. We also work on astrophysics projects, probes, robotics. All of these projects are being developed along with African countries. Just to mention one, I would like to mention the zeolite project. This project piggybacks the use of raw material and the development of new materials to do away with fluorosis, a disease affecting many countries in Africa, which has led to the development of a patent with the Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia and is already in the stage of implementation with an NGO with highly satisfactory results, I might add. Also, you may have read in the headlines that the CSIC in Spain has opened the serum test to Africa. We have lifted the patent rights protection so that African countries can manufacture the reactive elements for these tests. So, as part of the objectives from the Spanish government, CSIC is working on several projects. Climate change, point two, as well as other projects framed under the improvement of utilities like water and sanitation, and also on women empowerment. Projects that are mostly led by scientist women. So the connection established with researchers from the different countries is also very scientific. It's equalitarian because the people we work with day after day on these issues are scientists and have no gender. Well, thank you very much for sticking to the allocated time. I wanted to highlight your sensitivity at the CSIC because your main objective is, as you said, generating know-how, and therefore you have launched so many projects in cooperation with African countries in a vast array of possible projects, as you mentioned. Next in our agenda, we should give the floor to Álvaro de la Cruz, who chairs the Spanish Scientists Association. He is a head professor in the mathematics and applied mathematics professor in Cape Town, where he resides since 2015, and he is a member of astrophysics, cosmology, and gravity. Although he went to the Complutense University in Spain, most of his work has focused on studying theories that try to solve the open problems in cosmology and theoretical physics, where the relativity theory cannot provide a satisfactory response. He has been a researcher in the Cape Town University, but thanks to a Marie Curie contact, he came back to Spain. And after touring Spain, he once more returned to South Africa, where he has continued his scientific work. So he has a perception from both sides. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would also like to thank the organizers of this seminar, all of them. And in my acknowledgement, I would like to thank the Spanish consulate in Pretoria and in Cape Town for all the support we have received. After this personal presentation, I would like to introduce the dozens of scientists and researchers in both sciences and arts who at present reside, work, and cooperate with African institutions. It's the Association of Spanish Scientists in South Africa. But we are not alone. There are 18 associations of the sort in 18 countries of the world outside of Spain, all of them guided by the same criteria of scientific quality and institutional independence and loyalty, and obviously scientific rigor. As you can imagine, all these associations are located in highly developed countries. I will not make the whole list of 18 countries, but as you can imagine, we are in the US, UK, Japan, China, Mexico, Italy, France, the Netherlands, etc. South Africa, or our association in South Africa, is the only one of these associations in Africa with all of its positive and negative connotations. Or, in other words, with all the potential for growth you can imagine. Thanks to the cooperation of all present, so that we can become the Association of Southern Africa, or Sub-Saharan Africa, if you prefer. So, as I said, the latest association of the sort was created in United Emirates, Arab Emirates, all of them associations of Spanish scientists abroad. The headquarters to our association are located in Spain. In September 2019, it was incorporated as such in a scientific diplomacy meeting for Technology and Innovation hosted at the Ramon Areces Foundation headquarters, which institutionally supports our network of associations. At the end of that meeting, the king met with different associations heads, and during that meeting, the king pledged to mention or to pay a visit to the corresponding center whenever a royal visit is paid to a country where one of these associations is located. It already happened in the UK with a visit to a center in Oxford and with a meeting of Spanish scientists on the occasion of their meeting in the UK. We we have a set of principles, and we act as a think tank. I believe your Africa uses the same expression, a think tank to gather talent, Spanish talent abroad, to apply it to bilateral projects. Late last year, our Secretary General, Eva Ortega, was invited to the yearly meeting of the sponsors for the Cervantes Institute to highlight the potentiality of Spanish as a scientific lingua franca, scientific and cultural. I will only quote Ramón y Cajal and Gregorio Marañón as Spanish-speaking scientists. But about the association itself, science done in the south of Africa or in sub-Saharan Africa is a very high-level science. This morning you were talking about science. Well, out of the top 11 universities in Africa, well, of course, there are pros and cons to rankings, but out of the top 11, 7 are from the south of Africa, and 4 of them South African. In numeric terms, the top universities in South Africa are at a par with the Autonomous University of Barcelona, which is one of the top universities in Spain. What I'm trying to say is that Spanish scientist science practice in the south of Africa is top level, top notch. So these scientists decided to use their geographic location as as a highlight to their work. For instance, South Africa decided to back climate change as an area for research as well as energy security, sustainable human action. They decided to place their chips on bioeconomy, understanding autochthonous or traditional lore, biodiversity, human paleontology. As you know, the very cradle of the humankind is in the south of Africa, as well as astronomy, a field our host already mentioned I devote my work to. So, part of the science done in South Africa has to be done in the south of Africa. Because when you're there, all you need to do is open your eyes and take pictures, and everything a scientist needs is at the tip of your fingers. We have experts. I wouldn't want to leave anyone out of the list, but we have experts in paleontology, botany, climate change, theoretical physics, immunology, and virology. As you can understand, that a very powerful kind of research was already en route in terms of HIV and other diseases. Obviously, Antarctic studies, Spanish language studies, ecology, sun power, sustainable electricity. As you can understand, we cooperate with companies that are also headquartered in the south of Africa for R&D and I. So that's the background of the association. Well, obviously, as a scientist, you need to remain we need to provide references and backgrounds. We have already heard about the ICOP initiatives from the CSIC that allow us to visit Spanish colleagues and for them to visit us. It would be great to have a Zoom meeting amongst all of us to get to know each other better so that if these meetings take place face to face, we can make the most of these visits. I've also heard about the cooperation programs with universities here. Well, Erasmus Plus, joint master's programs, the possibility to develop joint chairs or bilateral programs between the South African CSIC, the National Research Foundation, and their Spanish homologue. Well, you can understand that France with their CNRS or Japan and Germany have already signed agreements with our institution in South Africa. So as the old film went, this could be the beginning of the beautiful friendship. So the Cervantes Institute supports all scientist associations abroad wherever there's a Cervantes Institute. However, we do not have that support, but what I'm trying to explain is that we all work with the Cervantes Institute on a horizontal hierarchy relationship. Well, of course, this includes scientific diplomacy. In that sense, the best infantry corps is made up by scientists who are already residing in a country who understand the country from the very field. As I said at the beginning of my presentation, we're delighted with the consulate and the embassy and the support they have provided, but we can provide field knowledge close to the ground and use this symbiotic relationship to help one another. And so that's my presentation. Thank you. And thank you, Alvaro, for that presentation.
I believe is very relevant, taking into account the qualitative data and the quality of the work and scientific productivity and excellency of the scientifics in this network. I believe that to design a country strategy, you must play an essential role being the liaison, as you mentioned, so that we can have the positive impact that is from a quantitative viewpoint to move in from a small number into a greater number that is similar to the situation of other European countries trying to give a solution to the Sustainable Development Objectives for 2030. So you are the protagonist. You should be a relevant protagonist in this type of process. Thank you very much for your presentation. And now, even though it was the turn of Jose Maria González Campos, taking into account that Luis Robina had some difficulties with his agenda, I'm going to make a change in the program if they both allow me, and I'm going to give the floor to Luis Robina Borge, Director of the Navarra Center for International Development. And just a couple of comments about him. At present, he has the responsibility of being the director of the Navarra Center for International Development. He's also been a founder of the Center Chair of International Economy in Navarra. He was Dean of the Business Faculty in Navarra University and Director of the Department of the Economics in this university, and also at the Foundation for Financial Studies. He's been visiting scholar at the Hoover Institution by Stanford University and Chicago University. Among the recent publications cover areas of international economics and development that very well fit with today's panel discussion. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, no problem with this microphone. Okay. Just really briefly, I would like to introduce some of information about my work. 12 years ago, I started an adventure, the creation of an international development center in the university I work, and this is an interdisciplinary center. We are economists, what we can call politologists, not political philosophy, but more political science based on data and quantitative analysis. And also, we have some other members, for example, architects, more specifically women architects. This is a very interesting center. We are also an autonomous center, but not 100% or independent, but we enjoy certain autonomy. And we have conducted works in African countries, but also we are carrying out some research studies in Central America, a very conflicted area of the world, and in the Philippines due to the historic bonds with Spain. And I know that I'm a bit out of time, so I will focus on Africa. One of the recommendation I was given from a Spanish woman that works in the World Bank in Washington when I started this center, she said, Luis, if you want to do good research on economic development, you should be in situ. You should not do field, you should do field research. So with these ideas in mind, we have been conducting research work in different areas. In Africa, we have been researching something that is very much on vogue, impact assessment, and specifically the actions of the well-known Joseph Kony that is in the border between Congo and Uganda. There are different local associations in this area that send some radio messages. We have sent the impact or influence of those radio messages in the searching of soldier children. As I said, this person is well known for being the king of kidnapping soldier children, devoting himself to such anti-ethical activities as kidnapping children from 12 to 16 years of age, drug them, get them drunk so that they kill, and then they are used as slaves. There are different associations in the area that using local radios, simple mechanism, and we have seen the influence of messages like "Come back home, your mother loves you," or even the voices of their friends announcing that the government amnesty was truthful. We have also carried out some work.
Migraciones, en concreto tenemos un proyecto vivo.
Migration, we had a project, the name is Vivo, funded by Foundation Ramon Areces, the second project funded by the World Bank. We are conducting certain interviews with a Gambian citizen working in our center. He's been in Europe for 10 years. He's a doctor in the Lisbon University. He works at the center called Nov Africa. And this research work has taken this researcher to conduct 2,000 interviews in 17 different places in Gavia with this interesting question: why do you risk your life crossing the Mediterranean? What are your incentives? What are the reasons why you embark in this adventure? This is a project funded by the World Bank about the influence also of COVID in migrations, so that we don't end up in those unfortunate situations for many. Just to mention another example, in the area of architecture, we're working with Dutch citizens. They are all women in this case, and we work with them in areas of space photographs about the slums, the poorest areas in Nairobi. They are more than architects, they are town planners that are working in how town planning can improve the living conditions of those that already have many difficulties living in the city. I will also introduce some other examples, and I believe that the experience we devoted in the last 12 years can be considered as more relevant. One of them is that it's worth it to get to know each other. I believe that's a precondition to really get to know the conditions of those African universities that we are mentioning in this seminar. I've been lucky to visit Rwanda, Kenya, and South Africa. I met Alvaro in one of the visits to Cape Town, and I could see how there is a great variety. And if Spain wants to have greater activity and presence in the African academic world, although it's not good to generalize, I believe that it's not enough to have an African view from Spain, but it's important to get to really know African universities. It's not only an exchange towards Africa, but also the other way around. We need to really get to know those African students. And as an anecdote, when we speak about Africa, on many occasions we speak about the scholarships, and I totally agree with this, but my center organized an activity for some Kenyan students for 2 weeks, in a 2 weeks course, research in economics, and a great number of those students during the weekend, they went to see a Barcelona match in Barcelona, and the second weekend they moved to Madrid, so they were from very high income families. So 80% of the students stayed in Pamplona because they didn't have the economic means to move. So we tried to enhance them several 10 visits around the country, but we shouldn't make generalizations. We should really get to know the reality in Africa. It's not the same to come from a large South African university than other African universities. And also, just a small note on the fact that research studies are essential. This is what we do in the center. We are not teachers. We're not responsible for any academic course, but I believe the master studies are very important. It's very difficult to get graduate students, and there are universities in the world or countries that have been mentioned by Alvaro as those that have state-of-the-art research more than the majority of Spanish universities. So there is, I don't know if the product is the right word, but there is an important degree, the master's degree, and Spanish universities have developed a great variety of highly specialized master studies, and this can be a pole to attract students and exchange programs. And almost to finish, to say that on many occasions, and at least for us, it has been successful setting triangular alliances. As has been said this morning, Spanish is not the best known language in Africa. Quite the opposite. Spanish universities are not really the best known in Africa of all countries. So to go and have partners with a Dutch university or with a North American or British or French university, to set partnerships would be very suitable to create some knowledge hubs. This is a sector that we really have to take into account, that is highly dynamic. So the university world, the academic world, and the world of research studies is being accelerated, and the techniques and technologies used, as Lujan said, the world has become a small village, and a lot will depend on how do we really adapt to the present reality so that we can really be protagonists in the African academic world, or we limit ourselves to be a second-class country. Thank you very much for your presentation. I believe you added interesting elements to this discussion, the discussion we have been working on since this morning, that are very stimulating, as it was said this morning, not only how practical a project can be, but also the importance of the ethical element facing the situations as dramatic as you have mentioned. It was also said this morning that to cross the sea, in addition to its inhuman difficulty, that is not reasonable nor positive, and those citizens should come by plane to be trained, as it was said, but also the reality of the soldier children, and I believe is, as a country and as a university system, we might have a saying in these situations. And I will now come back to the order, and I will give the floor to the director of the Higher Education Unit, José Manuel González. José Manuel González Canino. He has a degree in Geography and History by the University Complutense of Madrid, civil servant, related to the Autonomous University of Madrid. He worked for more than 20 years in different positions. He had the responsibility of the direction of the Office of International Relations and Mobility until 2009, working in the autonomous program of European Studies as director of the Erasmus program. At present, he is director of the Higher Education Unit of Spain, the ACPE, that also had a presentation today. So without further ado, we're going to give you the floor. Thank you, Mr. Rector. The Spanish Service for the Internationalization of Education is an autonomous entity related to the Ministry of Universities, and is the national agency in Spain of the program Erasmus Plus in the area of education and training. Erasmus Plus is the European Union program in the field of education, training, youth and sports for the period 2014-2020. And in the area of education and training, the program is devoted to all education fields, from primary education, secondary education, vocational training, and adult education. The program has as the objective to improve the qualifications and employability of students and to modernize training, education, and working conditions of the young generation. The budget is above 15,000 million euros to fund different type of activities around three main areas. Number one, that funds mobility projects, which is the most outstanding activity of the program. Number two, that funds cooperation projects between education institutions and with other type of organizations, for example, companies. Number three, that fund projects for the development of policies in the area of education, training, and youth and sports. The countries that participate in Erasmus Plus are the 27 member states of the European Union, plus some other countries as Norway, Liechtenstein, the Macedonian Republic, Iceland, Turkey, and Serbia. And we also have the associated countries, the rest of the world. The program includes an international dimension guided to back foreign action of the European Union, included in the development objectives through the cooperation between the European Union and the associated countries. Therefore, the program has as its main objective, through cooperation, to support the European organizations to face the world challenges that stem from globalization, climate change, and digital transition. And the intensification of international mobility is considered as key, and also cooperation with third countries that would reinforce the role of the European Union. The actions that can be funded in the area of internationality are mobility projects between the member countries and associated. Then Erasmus Mundus master degree. There are also projects to develop skills and competences, and then the Jean Monnet activities. Undoubtedly, one of the actions that had the greatest impact are the mobility projects between the European Union countries and the associated countries. They started in 2015. The activities that can be conducted in this type of mobility program are the students' mobility to carry out part of their higher education studies in other higher education institutions, or to make internships in companies for a minimum period of 2 months, a maximum of 12 months. And then the mobility of teachers and administration staff, either to teach or to organize training in other higher education institutions by a minimum period of 5 days and a maximum of 2 months. We should highlight that the funding of those mobility projects come from 6 financial instruments of foreign cooperation of the European Union. About sub-Saharan Africa, cooperation has been funded through 3 financial instruments: cooperation to development for South Africa, then the European Development Fund for the rest of sub-Saharan African countries, and the Trust Emergency Fund of the European Union for Western Africa and the area of the African Cone from 2018 and 2019 as additional funding to the existing instruments. Even though the opening of the program Erasmus Plus and the association with other countries started in 2018, 14, the reality started in 2016. In the first call, it was only cooperation to South Africa. But the cooperation with Africa is one of the action plans of the joint structure Africa European Union in 2017 as the formal way to develop European Union relations with the European countries after an agreement between the African Union and the European Union. The program has increased academic cooperation among the African and Spanish higher education institutions, channeling additional funding and promoting more participation of African people and institutions, fostering the relationship between the European Union and the African Union. The objectives are to support the students in their learning achievements, their personal development, active participation as citizens, and their employability, to support the professional development of those working in higher education to improve innovation and quality of teaching and learning, to improve the skills and the international dimension of participating institutions so that they can offer activities and programs that respond to the needs of the individuals and will contribute to the harmonization of the study programs. The objective of the European Union has been to attain in 2020 35,000 mobility students between the European Union and Europe. About Spain, in the 6 calls of Erasmus+, the Spanish institutions have managed and still do mobility projects for an amount of 11 million euros with sub-Saharan African countries, accounting for the mobility of more than 3,200 participants in 37 sub-Saharan countries, with the participation of 55 Spanish institutions and 340 higher education institutions from African countries. And to conclude, the new program Erasmus Plus for the period 2021-2027, after the success of the previous program, has been approved by the Council and the European Parliament, trying to reinforce the opportunities, trying also to reach a greater number of participants and a wider range of organizations, focusing on its qualitative impact, contributing to the creation of more inclusive societies, more ecological and adapted to the digital world. The mobility of the programs will comply a dual objective: to offer more opportunities to students and staff to have international experiences and have capacities for the future and their employability, and secondly, to enhance the higher education institutions of the countries in the program to offer sustainable long-term international cooperation with associated countries. The program has a funding of 28,000 million euros, almost double than the previous program. Around 2,200 will come from foreign cooperation instruments of the European Union that will be devoted to cooperation with associated countries. A great part of the budget will be to fund mobility projects, while the 30% will be devoted to project cooperation projects between education institutions and the development of policies in the area of education, training, youth, and sports. We hope that 10 million people can participate in this new program in the next 7 years. And this new program will incorporate a strong international dimension, a very powerful collaboration with associated countries in the activities of mobility, cooperation, and political dialogue. Thank you. Thank you, Jose Manuel. I believe that your presentation, together with the one this morning by Mr. Gentil, will allow us to have a global view of all the actions and programs and the instruments that are so important for the strategic development of internationalization in this country, specifically the project Erasmus+.
That takes us to our fifth and last participant of the stable, Teresa Langle de Paz, is a doctor in gender studies. In 2015, she became part of the consulting board of the Women for Africa Association, and in 2019, she joined the center of this organization in North Morocco. During this time, she has pushed forward global feminist initiatives, and she is co-director of the UNESCO chair in Wisconsin, New Mexico, in the U.S., and actually chairs Women for Africa. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Vice Rector. Thank you very much for staying with us to the bitter end. I would like to thank the organizers of this event and go straight into the why rather than the what. I'm aware that today has been a long, albeit interesting day. The academic cooperation work Women for Africa do is framed in our postgraduate scholarships and grants for scientific research. And I will frame it in a set of thoughts on learning, training, and the reasons why the type of cooperation discussed here today is so important. I would say it is of transcendental importance in today's world. To prepare my presentation today, I went back to some notes and literature on the old debate of education as a scientific tool for economic progress and modernization, where rationality and method are sometimes over overstated, and the human side that fosters self-criticism and thinking. In his book, in Marta Nussbaum's book, awarded with the Princesa de Asturias Award in 2012, denounces the dangers of a heavy contemporary trend towards utilitarian visions of education in favor of cultivating skills that are economically profitable in a world ruled by markets. Ruth Vaughan states that such trend is greatly undermining our capacity to see global matters, criticize the authority, and feel connection and empathy towards other human beings. These warnings from Nussbaum should not go unheard by those who are sitting here today. So the question of why democracy needs arts can be accompanied by two other questions. Why do economic development processes need the Spanish-America academic cooperation? Why must African women be at the core of academic cooperation and economic activity? Well, first of all, I will firmly state that there is no human, social, or economic progress without the full integration of women, even less in the case of Africa. There are many arguments to support this claim, but a few brushstrokes will suffice. When it comes to economic progress, in no other place like in sub-Saharan Africa do women represent over 70% of workers. In some countries in the south of Africa, like Burundi, Tanzania, and Rwanda, this percentage reaches up to 85%. Also, Africa is the region in the world where the percentage of women in boards of directors is highest in the world, up to 25%, coming from the efforts of new generations of African women with higher education. Out of the 15 countries in the world with most women entrepreneurs, 5 come from sub-Saharan Africa. Botswana is among the top 5 countries in the world where women entrepreneurs reach almost 35% of total entrepreneurs. Considering that as the IMF sustains the losses of GDP per capita attributable to gender inequalities in the labor market reach up to 27% in certain regions, if the participation of women in formal economy were to be compared to that of men, the GDP would permanently grow by at least 5% in the US, 9% in Japan, 12% in EUA, etc. It does not make sense in pragmatic terms, and it is selfish to maintain the huge gender gap that women suffer. At the same time, in terms of social progress, patriarchy, for better or for worse, keeps women socialized and convinced to build and nurture and value community above individuality. In other cultures, these trends are complemented by local features where individual well-being cannot be decoupled from group well-being. Some call this human value. In our experience in the foundation, Women for Africa, women who come to a research or a study do not stay in Europe because they want to go back to their communities, to their families. It is therefore clear that there is a multiplying effect in working with women, particularly with African women. And this is a benefit for all society to reap. However, and despite the evidence that has been made clear via the work of Marcela Lagarde or Maria Mies, even today, women are merely reaching the crumbs of modernity. So today's key question is, why does academic cooperation between Spain and Africa reach such relevance? And why does it go way beyond offering opportunities for individual development or trade and cultural links? Well, going back to the old debate on the kind of education we need to consolidate democracy, which was mentioned at the beginning when I mentioned Nussbaum, perhaps we need to go all the way back to the origins of the concept training. In the 18th century, this concept was linked to the concept of culture. For Kant, for instance, learning, training was the way to shape the natural disposition of humans in a process of overcoming the natural through which fundamental liberties were achieved. Later, for Hegel and Humboldt, learning was a little bit more than cultivating natural skills, and it became cultivating whatever allows human beings to break away from immediacy and acquire an awareness of general matters that leads them away from themselves to connect with others and acquire a spiritual being, as he called it. In other words, acknowledging yourself in others and making it familiar. That's the fundamental movement of the spirit that education brings. It causes human beings to renovate, to return to themselves with a broader awareness of the generality and open to other points of view. Overcoming the limits of immediacy helps people understand the importance of self-measure. Is there anything more important today, in general terms, than or as a fundamental objective of education and cooperation to struggle against some of the authoritarian and nationalistic trends we're facing? Dangerously short-sighted and endangering our democracies. We have a historical debt to those who have been severed from opportunities to develop their skills and talents. And certainly, women lie at the end, at the center, at the very core of this historical debt. Mobility and academic exchange need to happen in two directions, horizontally, with no hierarchy of science or knowledge, to counter the geopolitical unbalances of the world in which we live. Economic development and the progress of our neighboring country, our neighboring continent, and our own country and continent cannot be dissociated from a more humane view for which academic cooperation is a privileged space. In sum, Spain-Africa academic cooperation is not just a wish list to capitalize our tool for progress, which is knowledge. More than anything else, it's an action of extreme responsibility. As for that responsibility, we mustn't forget that academic Spain-Africa cooperation is an investment in our own future, considering the millions of youths that live in our neighboring continent. So, never stop thinking the kind of progress and development we're trying to promote using academic cooperation. We expect to generate new paradigms for development, for societies and institutions that will match the drifting of our present world where urgencies lead us to design a more sustainable and a more cosmopolitical concept using Bruno Latour's ideas. In other words, an idea of modernity where human beings will better understand the complex relationships that bring us closer to other human beings, other living beings, and even the inert world. Academic cooperation is a matter of maximum political importance. There are entire countries in the African continent that have been left out or left behind of the fantasy of modernity, and women continue to suffer even today the consequences of those who have used and abused modernity for the sake of economic globalization. For all the reasons above, Women for Africa upholds the idea that when it comes to cooperation for development, education and scientific cooperation in general are fundamental tools in our hands, as is working with women. We have launched several projects and programs. We have a program called Learn in Africa. It's a project for postgraduate studies. Thanks to the cooperation of several Spanish universities, we have brought this program to fruition, and over 200 women from the whole African continent have graduated and come to Spain to do their postgraduate studies. Thanks to the government of the Canary Islands, this year we're offering plenty of scholarships for short courses, language courses, certifications, and the rain of applications keeps pouring in, coming from all across Africa. And we're delighted to get these applications because we're reaching different profiles, not just newly graduated girls, but also young professionals in their 30s who are already in the labor market and who see the benefits of further opportunities thanks to these online chances or programs. We also have a highly consolidated project for scientific training, for séjours, for senior African female researchers, like heads of laboratory, etc., senior senior professionals with the Severo Ochoa Foundation in all areas of medicine, biomedicine, nuclear physics, and many areas in science. Astronomy as well, now that you're here, as well as oceanography. And also, thanks to the government of the Canary Islands, we have two new science centers in the Canary Islands ascribed to our efforts, which go to show the power of the leadership from African women in both of our continents. And there's one thing I cannot fail to say. It has been proven that this relationship is for the mutual benefit. Our grantees keep thanking us for these exchanges, but even their professors are thanking us because they benefit from the different methodologies and perspectives that these African science women are bringing to our research centers. And finally, we will also be opening a Women for Africa space in the Dakar Cervantes Institute to continue to work for promoting Hispanic studies to lay bridges between the African and the Spanish-speaking universe, particularly when it comes to the leadership of Spanish women. And last but not least, we insist once more that with all the Spanish academic institutions that work with us in our projects. I would like to thank them for their efforts to support these programs and their endeavors, as we believe they are a fundamental step in reinforcing women's leadership in the African continent. And it helps us build a more humane, more ethical, more fair, and more diverse future together that'll take us away from the short-sighted vision that endangers our democracies. Thank you. Thank you, Teresa, for your participation and vivid description of the activities you have launched in Women for Africa, and thank you also for your deep thoughts. Actually, it takes me back to another question or another matter, the connection between the levels of education in one society and their levels of progress and equality. And that takes me back to a recently published paper by the International La Rioja University. It's a private university in Spain. The paper is called The University Students for the Next Decade, something like that, a study of future university students in 2030. And that paper deals with some studies on where we come from and projects those conditions into the future to determine how future universities need to be designed. And the thoughts I get from your presentation is that during the first chapter in that paper, which looks back on history and shows how the level of education has progressed in our society during the 20th century, and you see the numbers at the beginning of the 20th century and how they evolve, there seems to be a very close relationship between progress at all levels in our society and the number of people having access to higher education. But even more striking is the qualitative effect when you do the gender separation, because it moved at a different pace. And the most significant advances in science in Spain came when women overtook men in certain scientific spaces. And that goes back to the thoughts you were expressing when talking about this project for cooperation. It's a lesson we should have learned already and cannot afford to forget for any future actions we aim to coordinate and or develop. So thank you, Teresa. That ends the basic presentations, but we have to allow some time for comments or questions. So please go ahead. Well, I would like to thank the four panel members for the interesting content of their presentations. If memory serves, I believe the four of you touched, well, maybe because it's such an important object, but all four of you touched on the matter of climate change. Ms. Gomez Borrego started by talking about the oceans without greatly specifying much. This is obviously not the forum for it. And then Don Alvaro de la Cruz also mentioned something about climate change. And I would just like to ask you, since there will be the 20th conference of the parties in Glasgow, and number 27 is scheduled to be held somewhere in Africa. I don't exactly know where. And this key will be essential for Africa. We read in the general literature that the African continent makes the lowest contribution to greenhouse effect gases, and yet they're the ones who bear the negative effects thereof. Well, this is, of course, common knowledge. But I would like to know if the CSIC or the team of scientists in CEPIC, etc. I mean, are there any scientific works in connection with the African Union? Because I'm sure they need to have a unique voice in both conferences when it comes to claiming very specific aspects. I mean, are we talking about theoretical research alone? Or are African executives feeding on the research results produced by scientists? Because it's a phenomenon that affects us all. And those of us who live between Spain and Africa know that these negative effects will eventually reach us as well. And finally, the Africa, just like the Canary Islands, which is an archipelago of a volcanic nature, still with eruption risk. Well, only a few years ago, a new island, submarine island, I must say, just emerged. Well, there are about 25 countries in Africa with live volcanic risk. There is a volcano erupting in Congo right now. So, are any of our geological research helping these countries? Because our citizens are voicing their concern, and we're also hearing the voices from African countries that yearn for our cooperation, particularly cooperation coming from research done in the Canary Islands. I know it's a bit of a generic question, but do you have any information on that? Of course we do. And that's a very important matter. And actually, this is a source of concern for scientific organizations. I mean, delivering the information, the data we get from scientific studies, not only to the usual scientific papers or the very dissemination of our work, but also making it known in other spheres so that this information can be used and applied in decision making. And although this was not the original intention of these science paper, I do believe that we have learned plenty from this health crisis. We have learned to share information from our work so that politicians and decision makers can use scientific data in their decisions. I believe that with this global change, with climate change, we have made some progress along this front. Our reports are more intelligible for decision makers now. We've tried to make them in a plainer language. And although we have not established any specific contact with any specific association or the African Union or any specific institution, scientific institution is increasingly available and will continue to be more available for decision makers to use. As for geological studies, which I believe was the second part of your question, well, obviously, researchers are familiar with the geologic conditions of the continent and the Canarian archipelago, and they know the risks those of you who live in a volcanic area have to face. And, well, you do what you can, don't you? There is an There's an increasing amount of predictive methods that use state-of-the-art technology to help us understand where a possible eruption or a geologic event will take place. And thanks to that, we can do better at prevention. Obviously, we still have a lot of progress to do in sensor networks and in coordination so that we can take timely decisions for the population to feel safe. Well, thank you very much. Any further comments, please? Well, I was looking for some material to answer your question, so I was both listening and reading at the same time. As I briefly touched upon a while ago, South Africa and several other South African countries have been smart enough to define their priority lines of research. They don't want to be masters of all trades when it comes to research, and one of those research lines is precisely global climate change and its evolution. I understand that for strategic landscape reasons and for the survival of the country itself facing aggressive development. So once again, in cooperation with the Embassy of Spain in Pretoria, we appointed one of our scientists, who was our Secretary General up until 2 weeks ago, to deliver a presentation to the COP26, which was held, well, the last edition was held in Durban, right? 6 to 8 years ago? Well, the previous one. I think it was back in 2013, maybe it was 2011, but it was held in Durban. So we have appointed a person to meet with the Environment Ministry and the Spanish Embassy in Pretoria, and I believe in the Center of International Studies for the UK. They will have some sort of three-party summit on the subject. So our former Secretary General, Jean-Lucas Mento, he comes from the Center for Trades and Experimental Biogeochemistry. Center for Trace and Biogeochemistry in the Stellenbosch University, one of the top South African universities. And our friend Jan Lucas has done some marine research in Antarctica under less than favorable conditions. He spends part of his time in Spain, in the north of Spain. So we already have that bilateral contact, south of Africa, Spain, so that he can deliver his view of his experience in his oceanographic vessel experience. So that's the expert I could offer you as a reference point, at least when it comes to marine climate change. We also have biologists working on marine biology, on the marine fauna, but not that specific to climate change. And there are also fishing companies operating in the south of Africa, some of them coming from Spain or headquartered in Spain, which are highly interested in the matter of climate change, and they're even doing R&D and I, and using radio frequencies for certain fish to not approach their fishing nets. But that's all I can offer you, just a quick flashes of the information I have. Teresa? Yeah, just one very quick comment. In our scientific networks, we already have about 100 female scientists from different countries, and many of them work in diverse areas of the environment, and they do research on marine and non-marine climate change. But I wanted to bring up a type of cooperation we have not mentioned today. I would say that higher education institutions, not just universities, also have a very important role to play in academic diplomacy, if you will. It's the role of fostering and promoting intra-African cooperation among African universities. We're creating a science program dealing with the environment with two universities, Mohammed VI in Morocco and the Hussein University from Senegal. It's a scientific exchange of female researchers and PhDs. 60 in total will benefit from this program. 40 Senegalese women going to the Mohammed VI University to work on a research project on sustainable agriculture. So it's a highly specialized cooperation program. It's an intra-African project. It's just an example of what we do. We also act as matchmakers to promote those spaces for intra-African cooperation, which is, I believe, a very interesting field for Spanish institutions. Thank you very much, Teresa. Yes, we do have another comment from the audience. Hello and good afternoon. Well, I come from the Vice Rectorate of Internationalization from the Las Palmas University. Thank you very much for inviting us to this very interesting seminar. I just wanted to make a couple of comments about research. For more than 15 years now, 17 more specifically, the Las Palmas University, which is the one I know best, has been participating in research and cooperation projects with Africa and has gathered quite a body of knowledge and research. This is not just cooperation. As in any other research project, there's always a contribution to innovation. And that is something that we have detected or learned in the almost 20 years we've been working intensively, because fortunately we've received enough funds to keep working in our research projects in the neighboring continent. Moreover, and correct me if you don't get the same feeling, but we're innovating not only in very specific fields, but we have generated some sort of osmosis and cross-cutting knowledge. So we hear Luis tell us about economy projects while working with Dutch architects. Well, the same thing is going on in our universities, or something very similar. And third, for almost 10 years now, we've been working on the concept of climate change islands to study the Anthropocene and understand the present situation. And this gives us valuable know-how that can be transferred to the continent, although not in a direct way. We're fully empathetic with their circumstance, but acknowledge the differences. And that transfer needs to permeate the culture we're intervening. Those are my comments. And I wanted to ask the panel members if you have detected any similar situations in your own fields. Thank you very much, Vice Rector. There don't seem to be any comments to your comment, but we do have another question. Yes, it's a very short question for José Luis. At the beginning of the seminar, the director of CEPIC told us that Spain is one of the leading countries in the Erasmus Plus program. So I would like to ask what you need. What do you need to further this program for African students? Can the embassy do something? Can any institution do something to bring more African students to Erasmus Plus? Well, yes, assistance and cooperation from the embassy would be precious to us. Whenever we can, we address the EC when they organize student fairs. We attend. And we've been in Africa several times for such student fairs, but the EC does not organize a lot of these events in Africa. But whenever they do, we try to be there. Because we cannot do it individually, but only as part of a group. So obviously, the promotion of these programs by embassies and higher education institutions in Africa would be vital for us, as well as for the education department in our foreign offices. We do try to promote Erasmus Plus across the world, so whatever advertising you can do for us would be welcome. Thank you very much. Well, if there are no further hands raised for participation, I would like to draw some conclusions from today's works on academic and scientific cooperation. So just two ideas. In connection with existing resources and the deployment of activities, I believe that your participation shows that there are numerous activities on the pipeline right now and in different qualitative fields, cooperation to development, research, clearly mobility, and second,
And then that there are many different stakeholders that are working from Spain. I'm thinking about the higher Board of Scientific Research, the government of Spain, the ministries, and the platforms as the CP. I'm also mentioning different type of foundations, and they all play a role. So the first answer from your presentations is clearly yes, there is a movement and activity in this direction. And about the second part, there is the state and status and potentiality of cooperation. There's a great interest. There is a historic opportunity now that we should benefit, and the situation is so heterogeneous that requires this type of seminar and working in collaboration in order to have a collective project. I would like to thank their panelists for their participation, and also I've been very honored to be the chair of this panel discussion that stick themselves to the time allotted to the presentation. Thank you very much.